Shabbat Shalom, Parashat Veyera. One of the great challenges of analyzing our forefathers and the actions that are portrayed in Chumash is to take a step back and ask ourselves, how far are we allowed to go with a critique of our forefathers? Do we need to see them as perfect human beings? Do we need to idolize them? Or perhaps the Torah is telling us stories in order for us to gain messages from them. Rabbi Shamshon Hirsch has a famous interpretation on this issue in which he explains unequivocally. There is nothing that can be learned from perfect people. In order for us to learn how to behave, in order for us to take messages for generations, we need to be able to look at the forefathers with an open, critical eye. It is not, God forbid, that we are criticizing them as individuals, but rather we are looking at the storyline in order to be able to internalize messages and try to get values from it and try to understand perspectives on how perhaps we should behave as a nation today. Clearly, there are many different ways to read these stories, and perhaps all of the ways are correct and valid, because it is not our job to try to analyze what actually happened historically, but rather analyze what kind of messages and values we could take out of the stories to be able to guide us as we go forward in our history. Such is the case in the particular interpretation of the events of the Akedah, the sacrifice of Yitzchak. The traditional model, of course, is that this was a great test for Abraham in which he displayed the ultimate level of belief and commitment to Hashem. Yet the Rashbam, the grandson of Rashi, offers a radical interpretation that sends us in a very, very different direction. The Rashbam, in perhaps the harshest commentary I know, expresses an idea that has powerful echoes for our generation. These days when we are all infused into political campaigns across the globe, both in the United States and in Israel, perhaps it is important to heed the message that lies behind this interpretation of the Rashbam. Says the Rashbam, Vayhi achar hadvarim ha'eleh, after these matters, God turns to Avraham and instructs him to bring Yitzchak up to Har HaMoriah and to sacrifice him. Which are these things that the Torah is referring to, asks the Rashbam. Answers the Rashbam, pay careful attention to the storyline that is right before. It is the saga of Avimelech and Avraham reaching an interesting contract by which Avraham commits for multiple generations to stay far away from harming Avimelech and his offspring. Thus, by signing this contract, he is committing Am Yisrael for future generations to forego their rights over a central part of the land of Israel. As history will tell us, not just any central part. It is actually the city of Yerushalayim, then known as Ir Yevus, that becomes inhabited by the grandchildren of Avimelech, and for generation after generation, all the way down to the time of David HaMelech, remains untouched because of this promise that Abraham made. If you read carefully through the storyline, it is quite amazing. Avimelech shows up to talk to Abraham, one that they have a warm and full relationship with, and he shows up together with Pichol, the chief of staff, the head of his military, sending Abraham a clear and powerful message. Abraham, you want to sign a contract with me or you want to deal with him? What is it? And so explains the Rashbam in a powerful way, and I will read this to you. Afkan achar hadvarim shekarat Avraham brit laVimelech lo lenino lenichdo shel Avraham. After signing the contract, the covenant between Avraham and Avimelech for multiple generations, and Avraham presents to Avimelech 7 kvasot, 7 lambs. V'chara apo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu azot. God was furious about this. Sharei eretz Pelishtim nitan leAvraham. This land was given to Avraham and promised to him. It was part of the inheritance of his children. And he even goes further to say this is part of the land that Kadosh Baruch Hu commanded on, lo techayeh kol neshama, the inhabitants of this land must be obliterated. Velachen, ha'Elohim nisa et Avraham, which means kintero vetziaro. He teased him and sorrowed him. What did he say to him? נתגאת בבן שנתתי לך לכרות ברית ביניכם ובין בניהם? You were so proud of the son that I just gave you to sign a covenant between your children and his children? עתה לך והעלהו לעולה ויראה מה הועילו כריתות ברית שלך. Go and sacrifice him, and let's see what good these peace treaties that you're signing is for you. Let's see if it helps you in any way, shape, or form to sign treaties that give away the land that I have guaranteed you. Continues the Rashbam and quotes a Midrash Shmuel to certify and validify his position, in which he says that the Aron Habrit, was captured by the Plishtim many years later and kept in the Plishtim camps for 7 months. And 7 great wars against the Plishtim were lost by us. And 7 righteous people were murdered by the hands of Plishtim, all because of these 7 lamb that Abraham lined up as payment for a contract that not only that he should have gotten paid for, that he should not have signed in the first place. My friends, it is possible to understand this with a very simple message that starts at the beginning of the commandment of Abraham to go on his journey. When Hashem says to him, Lech lechai la'aretz asher arecha, go to the land that I shall show you, the next pasuk tells us that Abraham leaves to go to Eretz Canaan, and he comes to Eretz Canaan. And indeed a very strange pasuk, because this land should have never been called Eretz Canaan. It was a land that was promised to the offspring of Shem. Canaan stole it by capturing it by force. Why would we call it Eretz Canaan? Simply because when Abraham was told to go to the land that he will be told to go to, in his mindset he was leaving towards Eretz Canaan. God in return says, well, if you see this land as Eretz Canaan, indeed it will be. Careful reading of the Psukim show us in a shocking way that Avimelech, that was known until now as Melech Gerar, once the contract is signed, goes back together with his chief of staff to Eretz Pelishtim. And Abraham lives in Eretz Pelishtim for many days. Indeed, it became Eretz Pelishtim by virtue of the contract that Abraham signed. It is incumbent upon us to understand that this land will be our land only when we clearly stand up with pride and understand that it is our land. And if we call it our land, then perhaps then the nations of the world will start to understand and appreciate who this land truly belongs to. Shabbat Shalom. Kol Tov.